Welcome back everyone, this is the third video in Tableau series and let's quickly recap what we'll be covering in this video. So in this video, I'll talk about data relationships, what are the different types of relationships, because again, this is another important topic that you need to know. And I'll show you how we can do all of the connections in Tableau, and also cover everything about blending in Tableau as well. So now that we have covered the various type of joins and how to handle duplicates and multi-field joins in our datasets, it's very important to understand the broader concept of how tables and their data related to each other. So while joins are very important tools for combining data, they're not always the most efficient or effective way to handle a complicated or complex data models. So in Tableau, we can define relationships that determine how data from different tables can be connected and analyzed together. So these relationships can help us when we're dealing with a large and very complicated data set. So in here, I wanted to explain about all the main relationships, and then we'll get back to Tableau and show you how we can do all of these concepts in real time or in real situations in Tableau. So let's start to talk about the four main types of relationships. The first one is called one-to-one relationship. So this happens when each record in one table corresponds to exactly one record in another table. So we have one example here. So we have two tables. The table A, or the person table, includes all information about different persons. And in table B, we have information about each different passwords related to that, related to all of the persons that we have, or the person IDs that we have in person ID. So we can clearly see that each person have only one unique password. So that means the relationships of these two tables are one-to-one relationship. One password, one person, and vice versa. And the second relationship is called one-to-many relationships. So in these scenarios, what happens is where we have a single record in one table, which is related to multiple records in another table. And one example of this is when a customer can have multiple orders. So we have previously had this example when we was talking about different types of joins, right? So in let's say we have two different tables. Table A is a customer table. We have different information of the customers, and in table B we have an order information of that customer. And when you look at the customer ID 1, you can see that for customer ID 1 we have multiple orders, and the same thing applies to customer ID number 3. So this is something that we call one-to-many relationships, where a single record in one table is related to multiple records, like having customer with multiple orders. So this is how simple it is. And the sign that we are using to actually show this type of relationship is something like that. So we can see that there is only one arrows actually coming out of employee ID, and we have that branched into 3 lines, which means one-to-many. Customer ID can assign to many orders. Customer ID can have multiple order IDs. So that's what we call as a one-to-many relationship. And this is another way of showing it. We can see that, for example, customer name Alice actually has different order ID. Order ID 101, 102. So that's the same concept. But the same thing applies for Charlie. So the next relationship is called many-to-one relationship, which is exactly similar to one-to-many, but from opposite perspective. Example of it is such relationship is when multiple orders can belong to multiple orders can belong to a single customer. So that's the same example that we had for one-to-many, but we just make it opposite, right? So now we have order ID, which have different branch coming out of it and then attached to an employee ID. That means multiple orders can belong to a single order, and this is another way of showing that. So we can see that order ID 101, 102 actually goes to only one customer name, which is Alice, or customer ID. And the same thing applies for Charlie. The table B, which shows the order ID 104 and 105, So these are the two different order ID, which goes to only one customer, which is called Charlie. The last but not least relationships that we need to know about, it's called many-to-many relationship. So in this scenario, we have multiple records in one table that are associated with multiple records in another table. And to explain this, I have this example here. We have a student table. We have all the information about the student. And on the right-hand side, we have a course table. It includes all the information about the course, like we have the name of the course ID. And so one very common example to explain this many-to-many relationship is when a student enroll in multiple courses. And courses having multiple students. So that's a very common example that I can mention here to explain this type of relationship. And if you look at the sign here, we can easily see that we have one-to-many relationship, which goes from a student table to the enrollment table. So what is this enrollment table? This middle table, which is called enrollment table, it's called intermediate table, and it's basically it is something that manages this relationship. We normally have this intermediate table whenever we have many-to-many relationships. So it's a table that can manage these relationships. So we can easily see that we have one-to-many relationships, which actually goes from a student table to the enrollment table, which means, for example, the student ID number 1, which is for Alice, actually enrolled to different courses. It's enrolled to course number 101, which is related to the math course, and also 102, which is related to the science. And then the same applies for the course table. We again have another one-to-many relationships that's coming from course table to the enrollment table, which shows that courses can have multiple students as well. So we can see that, for example, we have course ID 101 related to the math, which is related to which like two different students enroll in that specific course. We have a student ID 1 and a student ID 2. So this again shows one-to-many relationships, right? And if you look at the enrollment table or intermediate table in the middle, we can easily see that now we have many-to-many relationships because, again, students have multiple courses and courses have multiple students. So we have one unique table that shows these many-to-many relationships. And so this middle table ensures that each pairing of students and a course is unique in the enrollment table. So each enrollment is linked to one student and also to one course. So we can easily see that, like a student ID 1 enrolled to 2 different courses, and the first row is different from the second row, and then the same thing applies for the third row in the middle table. So we have only one student ID equal to 2, and for the student ID number 3, we actually have different courses assigned to it. So we can see that each row are different. We have unique pair of a student and courses in the enrollment table. So this is a very clear example of how many-to-many relationships actually work. So relationship in Tableau is a dynamic, flexible way to combine data from multiple tables without need of a physical join. So if you remember, when I was talking about how to do join, I mentioned that you need to go to the physical layer, which is this one here, and then you basically do a real types of join and combine 2 tables together. Basically, you will end up getting one single table after combining the list of order sheet and the order breakdown. But in relationship, we don't actually physically conjoin two tables into one or into a single table. We just Tableau we just use that to understand how tables are related, but do not physically merge the tables until the data is needed for a visualization. So it would save it until you wanted to create some visuals, and at that time we need to do some aggregation. So let's say you have done the data preparation and you get to this sheet 1 page and you wanted to have a bar chart showing profit by category and months of the order dates. So if you want to do that and you use a relationship, what it happens is in Tableau, at this time, because you need that bar chart, it will start to aggregate data based on category and the order date. And in that case, you can have that bar chart or any types of chart that you're looking for to have. So the main difference the relationship that has to join is it won't join the tables physically. It just, we are using it to understand how different tables are relevant to each other or related to each other. And the only time that Tableau start to do aggregation or combining tables is when we actually start to doing or creating visuals. And because of that, the relationships are generally faster and more efficient because it's a start doing aggregation whenever we need that aggregation. So other than that, it won't start to do the combining or aggregating the data. Let's see how we can actually create a relationship in Tableau. So as I explained, for join, we need to get to the physical layer, but for relationship, all we need is the logical layer, which is this layer here. We don't need to go inside of the layer in order to do the relationship. So to do the relationship, all we need to do is to drag the last sheet. So here, the list of orders is the combination of the first and the second sheet. But now we want to somehow combine the third sheet to this combined sheet with using relationship. And in that case, we just need to drag the third sheet and bring it next to the list of order and just leave it there. And you can see once we have done, once we actually do this step, it just creates this relationship. So if you hover over this line between these two squares, so you can see it would pop up some information. It shows relationships. So it says the list of orders to the sales market, and it's also showing the relationship between these two tables. So it shows many to many, and in bracket it's default. So this is a default types of relationship that Tableau detected. You can actually change those. I'll explain how you can change the relationship, but now you understand why I explained about all of those different types of relationships, because it's really important, because sometimes Tableau cannot detect the right types of relationship and you need to change it. And also the third line, it says about related fields, and this shows how these are like how Tableau actually find a relationship between these two table, and it's based on the category. But if you remember, we had another column in sales target, which is similar to our combined sheets of first, list of orders and order breakdowns, and that is months of order date as well. But the name is different. The name of this first column is different than the order dates. So that's why Tableau couldn't detect it to use it once we created this relationship. So we can easily do that by actually going to this section here, and so we can see that we can add more field in order to make it more clear. So we can select the order date here, and from the sales target, we can select months of the order date, and that's it. So now the Tableau it basically understand that the relationship between these two tables is based on the months or the order dates and also the category. So always double check how these relationships, how Tableau actually detect any relationships, because again, sometimes the name of the columns are different, but but they represents the same information. So you need to rename the column or just define it here in this area to make it clear and have a correct types of relationship. So one more thing that I want to explain about this relationship, that when we hover over at top of this line, we can see is many-to-many relationships that Tableau actually detected here. So I want to quickly explain why this is many-to-many relationship. If you want to change, if you found that the type of relationship is incorrect, you can go to the performance option over here and change it to any types of relationship that you think it's correct. But normally the default one is the correct one. Do not change the default relationship unless you're 100% sure that the Tableau didn't detect the right types of relationship for your data. But quickly, before I move to the another topics, I want to explain why this is a many-to-many relationship, just review that what we have learned. The first table here is a combined table, which is combination of list of orders and order breakdown. So we have all the columns in both tables here. So we have 3 dots here, which represents the rest of the columns, but I haven't had enough space to put all of them here. But let's say we have all of the columns from the both tables, and we also have the last sheet, which is called sales target, and we want to explain why this is a many-to-many relationship. So if you pay attention to the common columns between these two tables, which is category and the order date, we can easily understand that each category in the combined sheet can correspond to multiple entries in the sales target, and also vice versa. Because if you remember, I mentioned that in the last sheet, sales target, we have only 3 different categories: furniture, office supplies, and technology. And these 3 different categories has different target for different months of the year. Like for each month, let's say January 2011, we have these 3 we have 3 different types of category and 3 different targets, right? So so it makes sense that each category in this combined table will be correspond to multiple entries in the sales target, because if you look at this category office, we can see it's related to January 2023, and also we have the category office related to 2023 February. So and that's how it's representing. And also each month in the combined sheet can correspond to multiple entries in the sales target sheet, and vice versa. That's that also that makes sense, because again, we can have for one order date, that let's say we have January 2023, right? This month and the year can be related to category office, and also it can be related to category tech. So again, we have multiple entries. So we can clearly understand that this is a many-to-many relationship. Now it's time to talk about the second option. In order to connect different sheets together when we have different granularity in them. So as I mentioned, the first option for us, or first solution for us, was using relationship, right? In order to bring sales target sheet somehow connected to the first 2 combined sheets in order to create different visuals that we are looking for. And I explained about all of that. So now I want to talk about the second option, which is called blending. So blending, it's very similar to relationship, but it has one big difference. And that is we need more than one source in order to apply blending in our data sets. So if you remember, whenever we wanted to a relationship, we had one data source, and the only thing that we've done, we just dragged the last sheet to the first combined 2 sheet in order to create that relationship, right? But for blending, we actually need to a separate data source. Like let's say we have one data set coming from our SQL server, SQL Microsoft server, and another is coming from our own desktop and save on our own desktop, and it's in a JSON file or in a text file. Something is different, and we wanted to use them in order to all of these two sources in order to create a specific visuals or dashboard. And the granularity is different, and now we need to use and the only option that we have in this scenario is using blending, because we have two different resources here. So in order to show how we can do blending, I actually have a new data set. It's called airline comparison. So in this first sheet of this data set, by the way, I'll leave the link of this data set also under the description box of this video, so you have access to all of the data set in this video. So in the first sheet of this data set, we have period. In this column, we have two different years, 2015 and 2016. And the second column is region. We have Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, North America, South America, and then the same region is repeated for the 2016. And then we have different revenue in here, in the last columns here. And then in the second sheet, we have the same thing. So we have year. The name of the first column is different because here we have period, and in here we have year. But again, we have 2015 and 2016. And the region here is, again, the same. We have Africa, Asia, Australia, and Europe. But something which is missing here is these two regions, North America and South America. We don't have it in the sheet too. And in the revenue, we actually have different values for that. So that's what we have in this data set. So now I want to show you how we can do blending. So as I mentioned, we need two different sources of data. So first, I connected to this airline comparison as the first source. So now we have this. And we need to actually apply the same technique and open a new source. Select the same Excel file. And now, if you look at it here, we have two different sources, right? The first and the second one, which is both are the same data. So for the second source, let me see if we select the first source, and then we drag the airline one. So we have all of the columns, and for the second source, which is the same data set, we drag its own sheet here. So we have the same data set, but the two different sheets are separated within two different sources here. In order, I actually, the reason why I did it is just to show you how we can do blending. And the first step to do that is to have two different sources. So that's why I actually duplicated into two different and use the same data in Tableau. So now we have everything in place, and when we go to the sheet one, now we can see that we have two sources. This is unlike when I was using, this is completely different from when I was using a relationship, because the relationship we only had one. If you go back and check my video, we only had one source here. Later on in the coming videos, I'll talk about how to create, visualize, and everything. But because I really wanted to explain about this blending, I had no choice to give you an example of how, creating the visuals and show you what are the difference and how this blending works. But don't worry if you don't really follow me in terms of how I'm creating these visuals, but just focus on what is blending and how it's working. But in the later videos, I'll deeply dive into how we create, visualize, how we actually work with this worksheet in the Tableau. So don't worry about the visuals that I'm creating here. Just focus on how the blending actually working here, because that's the purpose of this video here. So I selected on a first source of data, the P1 airline comparison, and for the sake of this example, what we want to see is if we wanted to have different regions. So I have the list of the regions in the rows, and I want to see the revenue by based on different region that we have. And you can see that we have it. So we have Africa, it shows 18 million. So if we go back to our data set and look at our first source, which is the first sheet of this data set, we can see that the region Africa has 10 million here in 2015, and also in 2016 has 8 million. So in total it would be 18 million. So that's why we have here 18 million for Africa. So this is the sum of the revenue for the region, because now we haven't dragged the period yet. So that's why basically Tableau aggregates them in order to show us the different revenue based on different region. So this is pretty easy. And now we go to the, so if you look at this blue color here, so once I drag the specific columns into the visual section here, this blue color pops up, and that's an indicator of this is our primary data set. So let's show you one more time. So if I drag it back, now you can see there's no mark here, no blue mark here. But once I drag it and put it into this area in order to create visualize, that's when the blue color actually pops up. Like, let's show you one more time. So we have this, and then we have the region here. So now you can see that we have this blue color. So whenever you see that in blending, that means this is your primary, your first source or primary data set that you selected. So if we go to the second source, you can see that there is an orange color at this area. Let me just show you. So this is, if you at the very corner, the left corner, you can see the orange color, and you can see this somehow orange link icon here. It's appears. So this means that the Tableau understand it needs to be prepared for blending two data sets, combine the two data sets together. And whenever you want to use blending and you have two different sources, that's the sign that you would notice. It would appear in your Tableau, in your workbook, or in your workbook actually. So what we want to do now, I wanted to have the revenue as well for this source. So I drag it and I put it in the column. So now we have two areas. We have the revenue for from the first source, and also we have the revenue from the second source. And if you notice here, the orange color here, it shows, you can see this color here, that this is a secondary data or the data source that we have. The first, the blue color, it shows we have this as a primary data source. This is a secondary data source. And whenever you see this orange color, it represents this reason behind it. So now we have this data as well. So for these, so let me actually use label to show you the exact value so we can easily follow what's going on here. Don't worry about these steps that I'm doing, because I'll get into that in the future videos and I fully explain how everything works. Just focus on the blending feature in this right now in this video, right? So now let me, okay, now it's getting better. So now we have all the values beside these bars. So we can see that I explain how these 18 millions coming from. And for this second revenue, we have Africa revenue of 25 million. And if we go to our data set, we can actually confirm that, because again, for Africa, we have two values, 15 and 10, so it will be 25. So that's why we have this 25 value here, and 25,500 million value here, which is correct. And we don't have North America and South America in our second source, that's why it's empty. We don't have anything here. And so we explained about the color. When we do blending, this appears, and we just need to understand what is these two color. So if we go back to the secondary data source, as I mentioned, we have this link icon here, which shows that Tableau aggregated these revenue based on region. It's automatically happened because if you go back to the data set, you notice we have region in both sheets, right? So that's why like a relationship, the Tableau can automatically detect that this is the similar column. So probably we should do the aggregation based on the similar column, right? So it makes sense. So that's why automatically Tableau gets that and apply that. And this icon represents this. So it shows the Tableau choose region as a key in order to do the aggregation. So sometimes you have like different columns, but they're representing the same thing. Like if you look at this, we have period, it shows different years. And in airline 2, we have year, again shows different years. But the name of the column is different. So that's why the Tableau cannot understand that it should aggregate or connect these two sources based on the year or the period as well. To do that, we need to go to the data, edit blend relationship, and we click on custom, and then add, and then for the primary we have period, for the secondary we have year, and then press OK. And now we have the both region and the period and year as a key in order to connect or combine or aggregate whenever we use blending. So now what we can see here, this is another link icon here beside the year. Previously we had this link icon only beside the region, but now we have it beside the year as well because we have added. It is inactivated. It's not activated yet because we haven't used it in our visuals, so that Tableau know that it needs to aggregate based on the year as well. But once we use it in our visuals, that's when Tableau realized that it should activate this year as well. It's like a relationship that, if you remember, when we wanted to create a relationship, we needed to specify the relationships should happen based on what key or what columns, right? This is the same concept here. And whenever we use visuals, that's when the Tableau do aggregation based on those selected keys. So now we have the year and region. In order to make it activated, I can show how we can do it. So we are in the primary source, and then let's say we wanted to have the period into the rows because we want to see the revenue based on the period as well. So now we have 2015 and 2016 for both sheets, sheet 1 for the both data source or different sheets that we have. And if we go back to the secondary now, we can click on it to make it activated. And now if you look at the data, we can understand it better. So now for the primary revenue, for the primary source revenue, we have Africa of 10 million. So if we go back to our original data set and double check, we can see this is correct. We have only Africa for 2015 is 10 million. And for the second sheet for the Africa 2015, we have 15 million. So let's check that as well. Yeah, so we have 15 million, so this is correct. So basically, and also we can see that still we don't have any values or revenue for the North America and South America. That's why we have no bars, or it's nothing presenting here. And one thing that I need to mention here is blending is always do left join. So that's the only types of joining that the Tableau actually does whenever we create a visual. So we can clearly see that this is a left join because what we have here is all the regions from the primary or left tables. If that was the right join, we should have have only these 4 region showing here, and then the North America and South America shouldn't be representing here. So we've explained about this link icon, we explained about the primary and secondary, we explained that we need to have more than one source in order to use blending. We explained that the blending happens or the aggregation happens when we start the visuals, and the Tableau record to do aggregation for that specific visualization or the graph that we have created. So one more thing that I want to recap here is about the joins and its difference to blending and relationship. So whenever we wanted to any types of join, if you remember from my presentation, what we actually do, we just combine two tables at the row level before we do any aggregation, right? We don't do any aggregation when we do actually different joins. So if you look at this example again, so this was about the inner join. I was explaining about the inner join and how we can do it. So if you remember, for the inner join, we keep those rows that are similar in both tables, right? So for, let's say, the first row is will be matched with the first row of the second table and the second row of the and then the second row of the second table, or the table B, right? And then the same applies for the rest of the similar rows between the table A and table B. We have a customer ID 2 in both tables, so we will keep that as well. And the customer ID number 3, we have duplicates as well in the table B, so that's why we will end up having 2 rows of customer ID number 3, right? So at the end, we had this sort of table, which basically it's a combination of the both table A and B. But if you look at the order amount and other information here, we haven't done any aggregation. We just combined 2 different tables. So that's how joins actually works in Tableau. We just combine 2 different tables without doing any aggregation. But in relationship or blending, what we do here is we don't physically combine any tables together. We just whenever we start to use we start to create dashboard or different graphs or visuals, that's when the Tableau start to do aggregation. So that's a big difference between the joins and the blending or the relationship. In the blending and relationship, we don't physically combine table. The Tableau just aggregate data for each data source independently before combining them in the view or in the Tableau. So we really need to pay attention to the difference between the joins and blending and relationships, and that's how we can really understand when to use what approach in the future. So I want to quickly summarize and explain when we need to use join, when we need to use relationship, and blending. So join, we use join when we have a same data source, and you need to combine detailed records from different tables into one comprehensive table, right? You want to combine 2 different tables into a single table. That's when you actually use join. And the relationship between tables are straightforward. So normally when you have one-to-one relationship or one-to-many relationship, that's when you actually need to combine or combine your data by using join. And how about relationships? So relationship, again, it's same as a join. So we actually need only same data source in order to do a relationship. So it's we just require one data source. And you're dealing with the complex and dynamic data model. So normally when you have many-to-many connection or very complicated data, that's when you use relationship. And the last one is the blending. And like blending is opposite to relationship and join. You need to have more than one data source. So data is coming from different data sources. So that's when you decide to choose to use blending. And the data has different granularity. It's like a relationship technique. If you remember, the sales target granularity was different from the first 2 sheets. So that's when we were thinking about using relationship, and that's actually applies, the same concept applies for the blending. So normally when we have very complicated data or different granularity of a data, that's when we use blending. And the only thing that I forgot to mention is that blending, it's a left join. So we cannot use like inner join or outer joins or right join. So the only types of join that happens in the blending when we create visualize is the left join. So that's something that I forgot to mention here.